All right, welcome
Ladies.
back, guys. Ooh, Jeff, you gonna
Ooh,
start off? You start off.
no, you want me to start or you want to start it? I mean,
I
this
was
is
gonna say,
great right now. Like, you know what? I'm gonna not steal your thunder. You
edit
keep the
this out.
Tropic Thunder. No, we're not editing it out. You just keep it and you just keep rolling, buddy.
All right, guys. So welcome back to the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness podcast. On today's episode, I'm taking over the intro, although Jeff just wanted to, because this week we have the honor of having Alan Aragon on the show, who I consider one of the best body composition researchers and science communicators our space has ever known, and someone whose work I have an immense amount of respect for. I'm going to be honest, guys. I was just man crushing before we started this podcast. I have no shame in it whatsoever. But it's because he's had a massive impact on the trajectory of my own career as a nutrition coach and fitness professional over the past 14 years that I've been working in this industry. And just a little background on Alan. Alan is a nutrition researcher, author, and educator who has, I mean, at this point, 30 years of experience in the field. Correct, Alan?
That's right. Long
Awesome.
time. Yeah.
Hell yeah. So he's well known for being one of the most influential figures in the field of nutrition science and one of what I would call the godfathers of evidence-based fitness movement. So today we're in for a real treat. On the show, as I often say, my goal, especially with all the content that I put out, any of the podcasts that I do, is really to bridge the gap between information and then real world application. And Alan is someone who's great at both translating the research and then bringing science to practice. So Alan, welcome to the Chasing Clarity podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. How's your morning going so far?
It's going great. Thank you so much, Brandon and Jeff. And yeah, man, let's do this. Let's go.
Yeah. So Alan, give us a little bit more of a background. I just gave a brief introduction to yourself, but you have such an immense experience, and honestly, like your list of credentials and accomplishments were too much that I couldn't list it out. So I didn't want to do a disservice. So I want you to tell our audience, I'm sure many of them will know you, pretty much what you do, why you do it, and really your goal and everything that you do within the field of nutrition.
Yeah, man, started out as an art major in the early 90s. Actually 1990 exactly. Started out as an art major, spent almost 2 years in the art major until I sat down with a counselor and she shook me out of that and said, "Hey, what do you really want to do here?" And I'm like, I'm into fitness. And she kind of gave me this look like, well, we all know there's no careers in that, but that's what you should be doing. This was back in 1990. And so I started I did my undergrad in nutrition as I worked as a personal trainer through my undergrad, and then did my graduate degree in nutrition as well. And I stayed in personal training. I'm still in coaching, but mostly in research and education now as of maybe the last 10 years or so. But I've worn all the hats and I've enjoyed them all. And I would like to think that I'm one of the guys who ushered in the evidence-based movement in the nutrition space. So evidence-based movement meaning instead of just listening to the best looking or most jacked person in the room, you kind of cross-check their advice with what we've been able to demonstrate in the research literature. So evidence-based would be kind of the marriage between the field observations or the trenches and also the research, not just anecdotes, from the slickest person in the room. So yeah, that's kind of my role. I'm one of the forefathers of the evidence-based movement in the nutrition and fitness space.
Absolutely. And I say that without a hesitation. I will say I was very fortunate. I started training in around 2005. And luckily, my aunt was a dean at a medical school. So she had a PhD. She was very into scholastics and education. And she really pushed me in that direction. So when I told her that I had an interest in nutrition, interest in training, exercise, physiology, I'm a young kid, she pushed me to look for evidence-based sources. And at that time, very few people besides yourself and probably Lyle McDonald were actually using the term evidence-based. So I found you on the forums, I want to say in 2006 or 2007. And it's been 15 years of reading your stuff. So this is a dream come true for me, to be honest. And also, I just have collected so many questions over the years. You've really spurred a lot of my own intellectual curiosity because you would speak on a topic and you would always cite your references. And I'm that curious type of person that I really like digging into what people are saying, because and I'm sure, Alan, you could say the same thing. You see a lot of people, they make a lot of claims and they'll put a citation, but no one cross-checks them. No one cross-references their evidence basis. So I like going way beyond the abstract. So I'm going to, the conclusions, to the findings, to the methodology. And I'm really looking at, does the abstract really depict what this study actually found? And you are someone that you are spot on anytime that you cite, a research study, and you really enforce what you're saying. And then also you're objective enough that you're able to take a step back and say, this is my opinion, or this is what I've seen in practice. And that's really valuable because, like you said, I see evidence-based practice as like a three-pronged approach. We have the experiences from in the trenches of the clinician, or say the practitioner, like the coach like myself, or the trainer like yourself or like Jeff. And then we also have the best, peer-reviewed evidence from the research. But then also we have the experiences, we have the preferences, the desires, the goals, the capabilities of the client that we're working with. And it's combining all three of those. And a lot of people forget, it's not, evidence-based is not just research. It's not what the latest PubMed studies found. It's combining, it's all those things encompass a third of the pie. And they make it so that we have the best approach to getting, a person from point A to point Z.
Dude, I look at your Instagram posts and I think to myself, man, this guy is outworking. He's an overachiever with these damn posts and these captions. It's making me feel lazy, dude. So please.
100% self-esteem problem. I agree.
Like, Brandon, slow down, man. Shoot. Making me feel like a lazy.
I appreciate it, my man.
I have a question for you, Alan. This isn't in our
shoot.
show notes, but I want to ask you this because you identified yourself as a forefather in this space. How do you think the space has become since you've been in it now for 17 years, kind of like, at the top of the level?
I love where it's at and where it's going. Maybe a few years back, a few meaning 5-ish, 10-ish years back, there were not a lot of guys who walked the walk while kind of talking the science talk. But I can use Brandon as a prime example of a science-minded practitioner who puts the rubber to the road, puts the words to practice. And there's a lot of guys, there's a new generation of folks, a handful of them, who are in that similar vein. And we owe a lot of this to guys like Brad Schoenfeld, who is an competitor in bodybuilding. So he's spent a certain amount of time pushing and pulling the iron. And he kind of knows what the guys in the trenches want to see studied in the literature. So like prior to maybe a decade ago, a lot of the research in strength and conditioning even, and certainly in sports nutrition, was done on untrained subjects, most of the research. And so for the research right now, if we want to know like training volume, for example, sets, reps, load, what really works to grow muscle, what really works to increase strength and stuff. And we know now that, well, we've got to recruit resistance trained subjects at least in order to get the answers that we want. Otherwise, we're just putting newbies in the lab and then coming up with these spurious conclusions that, and so this was the landscape maybe 10 years ago. So right now it's a lot better. We've got dudes who have their nose in the books and in PubMed, but are also in the gym, like Brandon, as an example. So I like where it's at.
Good. No, absolutely. It's funny that you remark on that, because we really have turned a tide. Like, I've been working in this industry for 14 years. I've been training for going on 17 years. And it really has changed, because even if we look at just 10 years prior to this, before Brad got his, Dr. Brad Schoenfeld got his PhD, there was no external validity. So you would see these study findings, but it was with populations that we could never extrapolate and say, all right, well, I'm a bodybuilder, so let me put this into practice. And actually, the first study that I ever saw that I really dove into and actually applied to my own practice as a competitor myself, and then also as a contest prep coach, was I believe it's called the Evidence-Based Recommendations for Natural Bodybuilders. And it was yourself, Dr. Eric Helms, who we will be having on the show shortly, and I believe Peter Fitchin, if I'm not incorrect.
And Peter, yes.
And that was about 10 years ago. ago, maybe 2013 or 2014. And since then, we've had bodybuilding case studies. We've had more studies where there's ecological or external validity. We could take the findings and say, these are on similar people, similar types of individuals, active, trained individuals. And these are the type of individuals that are similar to those that I'm working with currently. So I could take your recommendations on protein or carbohydrate timing or fat intake and apply that in a contest prep scenario, or the training recommendations, because you guys had a two-parter to that study where it was training as well as nutritional recommendations. And it's just stuff like that that has really paved the way for having a foundation to refer back to, because it's great. I love seeing, observing things that I see with clients, but I also like having evidence behind it, or finding evidence that challenges my own observations or makes me reinforces some of the things I think or that I'm seeing. So it's always nice to marry both your experiences, but also with some evidence.
Yeah. And really the whole idea that certain requirements like protein, for example, are applicable to everybody. I mean, it is just wrong. You take the protein RDA, for example, that may be just fine for the general population where they're untrained, and a lot of them are either overweight or obese, and you apply the 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight number, and it's just fine, right? But then as you even can take the same person or the same client who may start out general pop, and you're with them for a while, and you're training them and you're developing them from being like a regular Joe or regular Jane, and you're getting them into athlete territory, well, then their needs change, and then the RDA definitely goes out the window at some point. And so I think that with any question about nutrition, the question that we have to ask is, what population are we talking about? What's the goal? And what are the stakes? What level are we talking about here? Are we talking about nationals and pros? Are we talking about just kind of looking good for the high school reunion? And, the requirements for those goals vary.
Absolutely. So Alan, just a little background for our podcast. We do series here. So we've done several series, and right now we're in the Metabolism Masterclass series. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on, and really what our interest is. Lately, we've been covering things like NEAT, energy expenditure adaptations and fat loss and things of that sort, as well as protein. So I really wanted to center this initially around fat loss and reasons for fat loss plateaus. And, a lot of times we see that there's these bottlenecks during fat loss phases that plague many people, especially during this time of the year. It's summer, like many of us are trying to get lean, whether it be for a competition or for the beach or a vacation. And I found your content over the years to be extremely helpful with this, because you tend to speak about many of the overlooked reasons as to why individuals hit these stalls. So can you share with our audience some insight into some of the main reasons people encounter fat loss plateaus?
Yeah, fat loss plateaus, the main reason would be non-compliance, or at least inconsistency of compliance. So that would be one of the main rules. The other main reason for a fat loss plateau is the in quotes legit reason, which is actually reaching energetic equilibrium. So you've just genuinely reached a new maintenance point with regard to the program. But it is quite difficult, because when people are complying inconsistently, they can get the impression that they're following the program when they're basically undoing it every weekend, for example. And so that is a big issue with plateaus. And with specific regard to weight loss or fat loss plateaus, I commonly hear people ask, okay, I'm getting, or my client is getting to a really low level calorie wise, like close to basal metabolic rate level caloric intake, and they're claiming to not be losing weight. I'm immediately skeptical when somebody says that they're eating BMR level calories and they're actually not just sitting around the house and they're not losing weight. What immediately comes to mind is this person has probably been dieting for several months. Who knows, maybe on and off for more than a year. And then what tends to set in during that time frame is the psychological fatigue of dieting and restricting. And then the body kind of defaults to its primal need to survive, And then you just basically are interspersing these Spartan periods of dieting with either purposeful or subconscious or deep in denial phases of overeating or binging. And so that is typically the case. And so, we've seen in the literature, I believe it was either 1991 or 1999. I don't remember the year exactly, but I think it's one of those, something in the 90s by Lichtman and colleagues.
Very familiar with it.
Where you did what year was that? Could
that was 1992.
1992.
Very familiar with that study. And honestly, it's probably one of the best pieces of evidence that we have for the commonality of misreporting, both in terms of under-reporting calorie intake and then over-reporting energy expenditure or physical activity levels.
Yes. And the magnitude of under-reporting and of under-reporting intake and over-reporting physical activity was tremendous. It was both close to 50% on both ends. And Absolutely. then what you end up with is a misestimation of around 1,300 calories more than what you're actually taking in. And so these are people who reported a history of in quotes diet resistance. A lot of the subject sample had a history of thyroid medication, and here they are under-reporting intake by 47% and over-reporting physical activity by 51%. And so when you imagine just like what it means to basically underestimate your energy balance by 1,300 calories, just imagine just taking your program right now, and this is for the listeners, and just stacking on top of it an extra substantial dinner. There you go. What's going to happen, over time? You're going to gain weight. And so those kind of misestimations are very common in the general population. In the fitness population, they may be more on top of what they're taking in, and very aware of the gram amounts and the calorie amounts and stuff like that. But there is a lot more, or just as much, denial and binging going on in the fitness population, more than they would like to accept or admit. And even with things like just weekend, a few drinks here and there, a dessert here and there, that can basically stall people out over time.
100%. This is what I refer to as a weekday dieter. So someone is in a deficit during the week. So they're under consuming calories. They're in a calorie deficit. So they get that mental restraint. So they feel like they're dieting because the majority of the week they are, they aren't in a deficit. However, on the weekends, all bets are off. And it's like, let me reward myself. I've been working really hard. Let me just have a little bit more. Let me have some alcoholic beverages, which they don't track. Let me have, a piece of cake or, whatever it may be. And a lot of people don't realize, say that you were in a modest deficit, 300-400 calories for those 5 days of the week. All right, you've amounted a 2,000 calorie deficit, but that's a cheeseburger, fries, and a dessert. You know what I mean? That you just undid your deficit. And then every single week, you're incurring metabolic adaptations during the week because you're in a deficit. So now we're upregulating fat, storing enzymes. You are kind of suppressing. We do see, with metabolic adaptation, there are suppressions to your energy expenditure. So you're burning less calories per day. Your resting metabolic rate is going down a little bit lower, thyroid suppression, hormonal adaptations. And then on the weekends, you're overfeeding yourself where you have already a depressed or a suppressed maintenance level of calories. And then people wonder why they're not getting the results that they want. And it's really trying. And I work with many clients about this, or, trying to really get them to be more moderate in terms of not only their approach to dieting, but also their mindset, and realizing that it's what you do over the course of the week. It's consistency. In order to be successful, especially with fat loss, it's the law of repeated effort. So it doesn't matter if you create this massive deficit during the week, if you're you're over restricting to overindulge on the weekends, and you're going through that yo-yo cycle, which eventually leads to yo-yo dieting. And that's why we say such high weight recidivism rates, because people aren't really cementing habits and behaviors needed to not only get fat loss results, but sustain them over the long term. So that's where practicing maintenance, going back up to maintenance for refeed days or diet breaks, and really practicing that lifestyle and incorporating it into your daily life is so essential. And I want to hit on a little bit of the Lichtman study, because those were individuals. What's really funny about that study is, the people that were in that subsect that came to that research lab, like you mentioned, they were what they called diet resistant. And the claim was that they were eating 1,200 calories per day. And so, like you mentioned, it was a 47% underreporting on energy intake, or the amount of calories that they ate per day, and then a 51% overreporting of their energy expenditure. And we see that because, I see that with clients. They'll go do a workout and have their Apple Watch, and it says they burn 800 calories. And I'm always speaking about the overestimation of these energy expenditure applications, whether it be a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or an Oura Ring. So then they overthink and they want to eat back calories, not realizing you really only burned, even in the research that we have, you only burn about 3 calories per minute during weight training. So it's really not that energetically costly of an exercise bout. It's more we're doing those for the muscular and muscle skeletal and strength adaptations that we get from that. It's not a great calorie burning activity. So now they're overeating, they're eating back calories that they actually didn't burn, and now they're in this restricted mindset and they're frustrated because they're not seeing the results that they wanted. So it's really a trying thing, especially with working with people in the real world, because in these research studies, in the case with Lickman, it was a metabolic ward. So they locked people in a lab and they used doubly labeled water. And that's how they determined that. They said they were self-reported 1,200 calories, but they were really eating 2,500 plus calories per day. And then they put them, I believe, on either a 1,600 or an 1,800 calorie diet, and they lost weight. And they were able to see in the confines of the lab, yes, I can lose weight. I don't have a metabolic issue. I'm not metabolically damaged, or whatever it may be. And, but it took being locked up. It wasn't a free living study. So in reality, we're dealing with people in the real world. So it's a really frustrating thing to go through fat loss plateaus with clients, because they get this narrative and they tell themselves a story, and it becomes, I'm metabolically damaged, I'm diet resistant, I'm metabolically resistant, I'm in starvation mode. And we all know through the literature that that doesn't exist. You know what I mean? If you are in a true energy deficit, you will lose weight. The body has no other choice. No one is exempt from starvation. Let's just say it like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you're in a true energy deficit, you're going to lose weight.
Right. And you may be able to relate to this one. Well, maybe not as a parent with kids, but working with parents with kids, very difficult population. If you're looking at middle-aged parents with kids, because they use food as a sort of a stress medication and an anxiety medication. And they also use food to entertain themselves or their guests. And having a social life and having certain obligations, certainly having children around with the stress and the obligations there's just multiple forces that are pulling these folks away from program compliance. And so, so it really is a matter of how can folks comply. And in my opinion, the way to get people to be consistent and compliant is to find the groove that they actually, not necessarily, they don't have to love it, but they at least have to not hate it. And if they enjoy it and they like it, even better for the long term.
I agree. No, I'm really into dialing in the process and also increasing awareness, like even if it's mindful eating strategies or just mindfulness in general, because what I find with a lot of my parents, my clients that are parents, actually just did an energy audit on one of my clients this weekend, because there were inconsistencies in her weight and in her trajectory for fat loss. And it wasn't just the regular, she stalled out for a week. We're talking multiple weeks on end where she was not only stalled, but then starting to gain weight and claiming that she was eating the same calories, the same macronutrients, the same food sources. And so I did an energy audit, and I went throughout the course of her day. I wanted her to report. I had her do a food diary. So every time you eat something, you put something in your mouth that isn't attached to your husband. Anytime you do that, I want you to write it down. And so what it ended up happening was it brought such an awareness to, I've only been working with this individual for about 9 or 10 weeks at this point. So we really hadn't encountered a stall, until like the 6-week point. And so with that, she started saying, wow, I didn't realize the bites, the licks, the tastes, the condiments, cleaning up my kid's plate. I didn't want to throw that out. As soon as I got 2 days into I told her to do a 3-day energy audit. So I just said, listen, anytime that you eat something, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it has calories. Even if you put creamer in your coffee, little things that you think are incidental, they're going to add up. You know what I mean? If you add in some condiments, if you use more than, if you're using a 0-calorie condiment, but you're using, a whole slew of it, it's going to add up. It has incidental calories. And we also know that food labels they have the ability to be up to 20% off. So just within that, we're seeing all these deviations. And so just by that, it was an awareness tool. And so I'm very confident she did this over the course of last week into this weekend. She sent me the energy audit on Saturday. And just that awareness, I think now she realizes there's nothing wrong with me. You know what I mean? It's just, I was doing things unconsciously. I was distractedly eating. I was mindlessly eating. And that's why I was starting to see a stall and then seeing weight gain, because now that I've done the energy audit, and one day she was actually in a surplus of 334 calories. And so, yeah, if that's going to add up over time, that was one day that we captured. Imagine if she did that throughout the course of the week. That's why she's gaining, a little bit over half a pound a week. So it was just that awareness tool and just really bringing it back to what are you doing throughout the course of your day? Like, let's just, make some habits for yourself. And the habit being you eat when you sit down and you're in a good headspace. You're not on your phone. You're not watching, television. If you want to engage with your family, absolutely. Let's put our fork down in between bites. Let's use smaller cutlery or smaller bowls or plates to make your meals look larger. Let's preload with a salad or with some water. Like you're big into, the 2-glass rule.
Yep.
And I've used that with many clients over the years.
Love it.
You essentially use, you take in 2 glasses of water. It's going to help with the expansion of the stomach. We know that food is not, satiation is not just from a calorie load perspective. It's also from volumetrics, which is research from Barbara Rolls, dating back 30, 40 years ago. And really what we're looking for is that stretching of the gastric receptors so that we get that signal to the hypothalamus, listen, I'm satiated. And we're getting those satiety signals, whereas you can eat a bunch of calories, but if it's low, it's high energy density, low volume foods, like highly processed or highly refined foods, you're not getting that same satiation effect. So you're not feeling full. And that's especially, deleterious during a diet because you're looking for that fullness because you're so much, your hunger's upregulated, you have low energy, and you just want to soothe yourself.
And, a lot of the folks who can afford our services, they eat at fancy restaurants a lot. And, with this gourmet cuisine, the cooks just love to put like a stick of butter per plate.
Stuff you cannot sense. I always tell them, I say, listen, it doesn't matter that we have food labels on these menus now. That's great. It's giving you a little bit of awareness tool, but keep in mind that your chef in the back is not a macro chef. They don't care to oblige by the recommendations or the parameters that are set on that menu. They're going to make this food as hyper palatable and as desirable as possible. So you keep ordering more. That's how they make money. So realize that a couple extra, tablespoons of oil are going in, or a stick of butter or something like that. And those are calories and that you're not going to pick up on. There's no satiating effect from those liquid calories. And it just tastes so good that you're not even pulling it back and saying, oh, this is actually 300 or 400 calories more than I expected it to be.
Definitely. And, the concept of sensory specific satiety, you can really exhaust that in a restaurant. You get the appetizers coming through, and then normally you probably would be full, but then you have the next main coming through and it's a different experience. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, I have an extra compartment for the main. And then when you're done with the main, you should be full, but sensory specific satiety says that, well, I haven't really exhausted my desire for dessert. So let's go.
Always
ahead
have
and
a second stomach for dessert.
Fulfill that compartment. And yeah, it's problematic when people eat out at fancy restaurants a lot. It is problematic. And usually the people who can do that are the middle-aged parents. So y'all are a problem, you middle-aged parents.
All right, Alan. So we covered one of the topics that
I
wanted to go through. Jeff, you're great as a parent, though. Jeff has 2 children, but I stayed with him a couple of weeks back in Tennessee, and his son, he's what is he, 11 years old at this point?
11 years old.
Gets up, makes a protein powder with oats. Like he eats like a bodybuilder. It's phenomenal.
His 11-year-old son.
Yes. Jeff is a walking representative of a fitness professional and someone that lives a lifestyle day to day. And that's rubbed off on his children because I was in the kitchen with his son by ourselves. It wasn't like it was forced. I asked him, listen, do you want any help with anything? No, I'm good. And he just made his own meal. He had his protein powder. He added his cinnamon and stuff. And it was just great to see because awesome. It's showing that as a parent, by walking the walk and just leading by example, not forcing that upon your kids, but just setting a positive example that you could really impact the trajectory of that child's life.
Agreed. Completely.
All right. So the second question that I had was on the topic of like metabolic damage. We pretty much went through it. A lot of times it's not that people are diet resistant. Mm-hmm. It's that they're not as observant or not as dialed into some of their nutritional habits that are really adding up over the course of the week or over the course of the month. Yeah. But what I would love to hear your opinion on are what issues do you see with papers that people who believe in starvation mode used to reinforce their belief in metabolic damage being real. Because we hear, there are people that are in that camp. They're selling a narrative and they're saying, you are damaged. You do have, you're in starvation mode. You're gaining weight from eating too little calories. And I feel like they often bring it back to papers like the Biggest Loser study, which has been reanalyzed, and we see that's not the case. We actually see that those with the most suppression of resting metabolic rate, when Kevin All just recently reanalyzed it, they had the greatest weight loss, and it was because of that maintenance of that weight loss. But I also feel that I love evidence, I love the research, but I do think that there's a lot of flaws within these studies. The fact that they don't have controlled resistance training programs, protein intake, there's all these examples, and I would love for you to dive in and just share with our audience. Listen, you might be only looking at the abstract and the conclusions, and we're seeing this metabolic damage or this metabolic adaptations, this suppression of total daily energy expenditure. But there's some caveats that we need to take into consideration. It might not apply to you if you're doing A, B, and C.
Yeah, well, like you mentioned, the crux of the issue here with the metabolic damage thing is we're looking at a population who is just on the absolute extreme end of things. We're looking at a nationally and maybe internationally televised TV show where people come in at like 300, 400, 500 pounds, and they have a major cash prize at the end. I'm even forgetting what the cash
it's in
prize.
the hundreds of thousands.
It was like 100,000 is where it started. I think they escalated it over time.
They cranked that up significantly. And so you go in there and truly, trainers in charge of the subjects here, they're I don't know what their qualifications are, but the couple of times that I watched the show and watched the the trainers in charge, I'm like, wow, they really just I don't know where they found these people and what the criteria for picking them was, but they're just making these folks cardio themselves to death, and they're just focused on like maxing them out as far as just day-long cardio, basically. And nutrition wise, it's really all over the place, but I think that they were trying to push the sub 1,000 calories, and even if they did assign, like, let's say 1,200 calories or some sort of generic diety number like that, the subjects themselves were trying to eat as little calories as possible day by day. And if you read the behind the scenes accounts, subjects were trying to cut their intake off at like 500, 600, 800 calories a day if they could. And so you're looking at extreme protocols that the normal person in the general population, especially at those body weights, 300, 400, 500 pounds, would never and should never engage in, especially combined with just hours of cardio a day. And also behind the scenes, there was a little bit of pharmacology going on, a little bit of potentially amphetamine or amphetamine-like use going on just to kind of survive the day and survive the protocol. And so when you combine just a few hundred calories a day with being on the treadmill for hours a day, combined with a lot of uppers, a lot of stimulants, some legal, some not, you basically have a recipe for what would qualify as, in quotes, metabolic damage. But even when we look at these subjects and what happens to them resting metabolic rate wise, we're still honestly within 15% of what losses of lean tissue would predict. So even with the worst case scenario, where you have the perfect storm of the worst and maybe the most dangerous and least sustainable way to lose weight, you still only have about 15, possibly high teens percentage-wise reduction in resting metabolic rate beyond what we would be able to just predict from normal losses in lean tissue. And we can go back to
we have to realize that's completely normal. We see that
right.
Rosenbaum and Leibel have had studies since 2010 that have shown up to a 15% suppression in resting metabolic rate, but it's based on what's expected off of the weight loss alone. However, that's over 10% of body weight or more. But beyond that, people think you could really get metabolically damaged or that you suppress and permanently damage your metabolism. But here's the thing. Let's think about what basal metabolic rate is. It's the energy that keeps the lights on, that keeps you functioning. we have to realize that they can only get suppressed so much. And when Rosenbaum and Leibel have done further studies where they analyzed in 2016, they took people from losing 10% of body weight down to 20% of body weight. The only further reductions we saw in energy expenditure were from the NEAT component. They downregulate their subconscious and unconscious activity. We don't see further suppression of your resting metabolic rate because you cannot go lower than what your body needs to survive. And a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to permanently damage my metabolism. Your body is going to preferentially, it's triage theory. It's going to preferentially, help survival or make sure that you're able to survive over everything else. So there is no permanent metabolic damage or starvation mode. It's just, it's a lot of misextrapolations of research.
Right. And, you mentioned that these biggest loser subjects, in addition to the elements that I mentioned, diet-wise, there was no indication that their diets were optimized either in terms of protein intake. And there certainly was no indication that their training programs were optimized in terms of resistance training. And so the protein and the resistance training elements are missing. If we go back to the Lichtman study, which I'm super impressed you remember the 1992 date with.
I'm a big study guy, my man.
Yeah,
the audience knows that.
I am impressed. So
thank you.
And I'm a big study guy too. So, when you look at their examination of resting metabolic rate, everybody's RMR was within 10% of normal predictions. So even if we take somebody whose RMR is 10% below, we can know for damn sure that they haven't been properly resistance training and or properly intaking the right kind of macronutritional breakdown, specifically with protein. And so though that little 10% can conceivably be alleviated by just getting the resistance training and the protein up in that population. So you look at that particular population and you see that, well, they claim to be diet resistant and they claim to be basically impervious to energy deficits. And they only have and their resting metabolic rates are really, for all intents and purposes, within the normal margins. Then we have to kind of take a step back at the metabolic damage concept and maybe concede that, okay, it's probably overblown that it's the resting metabolic rate component of energy expenditure that's getting the biggest hit. And maybe the most insidious hit and the hardest one to actually track is the non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or the NEAT component, which can vary greatly across individuals. People have different proclivities towards unconscious or subconscious movement while sleeping and while waking, fidgeting, while, their tendency to park closer or further, their tendency to use stairs versus escalators, and their tendency to just, bob their head and just kind of groove to music and stuff like that. So the NEAT component is potentially the X factor in making people wonder what's going on. Why am I eating a few hundred calories less, but nothing's happening? And what typically is the scenario is that their non-exercise activity just insidiously dropped behind their back and gradually over the dieting process.
Yeah, we've actually done a few episodes on NEAT, and one of the studies that I went over was by Rosenbaum, and what he looked at was he broke down the amount of suppression or reduction in total daily energy expenditure into different components. And initially they saw about a 500 calorie reduction when there was 10% of weight loss. But when he broke that down into the resting energy expenditure and then the physical activity energy expenditure, what he saw was only 100 calorie decrease in their total daily activity or daily energy expenditure came from the resting metabolic rate. So it was 100 calories that they lost on average. However, the other 400 calories came just from down regulations and reductions in their non-resting energy expenditures. So from the NEAT component, they were moving less. They had increases in mitochondrial efficiency. So for every movement that they made, even if you were training in the gym, you're now burning less calories for every single step that you take, every bicep curl that you lift and things of that sort. And a lot of people, they overlook that component and they focus so much on resting metabolic rate, thinking that that's like the biggest lever. Like once that's suppressed, we're done. And here's the thing, like we see in research that we generally only see within populations of the same body composition and same size, between a 2 and 9% difference in resting the resting metabolic rate component. But we have research from Black that Black et al. That shows that between two people of the same body composition, weight, and sex, that their energy expenditure from NEAT can amount 2,000 calories. So if you're an office worker, that was the particular study, it was an office worker, and they measured their energy expenditure throughout the course of the day. It was 300 calories. When they put them out into the fields for a labor intensive, work day, they burn 2,300 calories. So it's this massive reduction. Realize, guys, like, it's not coming, you're not going to vary between someone your same size between 2,000 calories on your resting metabolic rate, which a lot of people term as metabolism. It's going to be the NEAT. It's going to be your activity, your proclivity to move, your activity levels, like how active you are throughout the course of your day. Because you might be in the gym 1 hour a day, but we're generally awake 16 hours throughout the course of the day. If you have a good 8-hour sleep routine, which many of us don't. So say we're up 18 hours a day, you're in the gym 1 hour a day, but there's 17 other hours throughout the day that you could be burning calories.
Yep. And that's the story with the whole metabolic damage thing, is once you realize that you're looking at the wrong thing, if you're looking at RMR, especially when you've got the other variables right, like calories, protein, resistance training. If you're looking at RMR, you're looking at the wrong thing when you're trying to figure out what's going on with the downshift in energy expenditure.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. All right. So we're going to transition a little bit over. There is a topic that I've been wanting to cover with you, Alan. You are probably the expert at this besides Jose Antonio himself, and it is protein overfeeding. And so, this is something I've been wanting to talk to you for quite some time, because, we know that Jose Antonio has done several protein overfeeding studies at this point where, for the audience's background, he's essentially taken subjects and raised their protein intake to really high amounts, even up to 4.4 grams per kilogram, and has increased their reported calorie intake by between 400 and 800 calories. And in these studies, they've seen no fat or weight gain as a result of these calorie increases when they've come exclusively from protein increases, and more specifically than that, from whey protein powder. Whereas with other overfeeding studies, like carbohydrate overfeeding studies, fat overfeeding studies, or mixed overfeeding studies, we do see substantial weight gain. And based on my own experience, at this point, I've worked with over 1,000 clients, and I work with many that are into the research. And I'm sure, Alan, you get the same type of experience where people are into the research, but they're only looking at that abstract. They're only looking at the conclusions. So I think a lot of people misextrapolate, Jose Antonio's findings and think this means protein is essentially a free macronutrient. Like, there's no calories involved. And I've even heard, some within the nutrition space claim that you can just pretty much eat, as much protein as you want, or to satiety, and just count your calories from energy substrates like carbs and fats. So what I'd like to do is I'd love to hear your take on the potential mechanisms for why we see these extra calories essentially, like, quote unquote, disappear during free living overfeeding protein studies. Because if we look at more tightly controlled studies like the 40% overfeeding study by Bray, where he did manipulate the protein intake in the diet, we do see weight gain, when subjects get their calories increased via protein. And granted, the high protein group within that study, they saw greater increases in lean body mass, but they still gained weight because they were in a 900 calorie surplus. So, can you go over some of what you think are the potential mechanisms in these overfeeding studies as to why we see no weight gain with Jose Antonio studies, but when they're tightly controlled, we do see weight gain?
Yeah. I think that the main difference between those study designs, if we just kind of go to, the basic PICO model, population intervention comparator outcome, it's the population and the intervention part that are most different. So with Bray and colleagues in their highly controlled, highly surveilled metabolic ward inpatient settings, when they overfed the just escalations of protein, and they saw weight gain, they saw lean gain and fat gain in the highest protein amount, which I believe was like three-ish grams per kilo, 3 point something grams per kilogram of body weight protein intake. They saw the greatest lean gain, but also the greatest fat gain, compared to the, I believe it was 15% protein and then 5% protein in the moderate and the low groups. Okay, so Bray et al. Witnessed fat gain, even with escalating the protein intake. Okay. Joey Antonio, as you just gave a rundown, didn't see any fat gain. In fact, didn't see any significant changes in body composition in spite of raising protein intake to 3-ish all the way up to over 4, like 4.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. Didn't see the protein disappeared with Antonio et al., but the protein facilitated fat gain with Bray et al. So with Bray et al., they used sedentary subjects, untrained, no exercise program, just had them sit and eat. Now, Joey Antonio's subjects were resistance trained and by all measures pretty athletic. So kind of this recruiting jocks from college, basically. Okay. And their pre-existing protein intake was already around two-ish to low 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So you're already looking at bros who train basically in Joey Antonio's work. And so you set those guys free in a free living condition, and you say, hey, we're going to stack this protein on top of your program. So you take that population, you give them that assignment, then that's going to have a completely different effect psychologically and what they do with those extra protein calories. So Joey Antonio's subjects, I would imagine, were almost pretty excited about getting that protein in, the extra protein in. And what I would hypothesize is they just basically put that power to the ground in quotes. So they took that incoming energy and then just used it to increase training output. And so I'll go over like some other things that could have happened that helped the protein disappear. But in Bray et al.'s metabolic ward study on sedentary, like non-training subjects where the fat gain did occur, everything was strictly accounted for. And lo and behold, the energy surplus, especially under untraining conditions, resulted in what we would expect. An unused surplus of calories that doesn't go towards the building of lean tissue is going towards the storage in fat tissue. Now, in Joe Antonio subjects, they're already trained, so they already have a different physiological and oxidative infrastructure, if you will. And what happened with them is a combination of at least three things, maybe a fourth. So the first thing would be the potential for a decrease in otherwise energy intake from the other macronutrients when they bumped up their protein by 400 to 800 calories.
So they essentially displaced their carbs and fats. Like they ate more protein, they ate less of the other energy substrates.
Right.
So that 400 to 800 calories wasn't really a 400 to 800 calorie surplus.
And it could have been, some of it could have been, but I mean, technically it didn't end up being a surplus.
Exactly.
But they certainly could have been eating more than they were previously. But I also think there was an increased energy expenditure component to match it up as well, if just only subconsciously. So the first thing would potentially be a displacement of intake, where the other macros were subconsciously decreased or driven down in the wake of the increased satiating effect of the increased amount of protein that they were assigned. And so that's number one, the displacement effect. And along with that, piggybacking on with that, is a potential miss or over-reporting of protein intake. And so there's an interesting phenomenon with misreporting amongst subjects in general. Subjects tend to over-report the healthy stuff that they eat and under-report the crap. So they basically under-report fatty combinations of carb and fat, and they over-report lean protein.
And this is going to be typical of your bros that were in this study. You know what I mean? They would, no one wants to have the shame of, hey, I was put in a protein overfeeding study. They gave me free protein. I had every meathead's dream, but I didn't hit that protein requirement.
Right.
You know?
There is the distinct and maybe highly likely possibility of a certain percentage of misreporting, either consciously, due to shame, due to avoiding shame, like you mentioned, or unconsciously, just by natural human error. And so there's the displacement, there's misreporting. And somewhere along the way, I do believe that there was an increase in energy expenditure. And that could either be, it's likely through a combination of non-exercise activity, potentially, and also exercise activity. So this particular population scooping down the extra protein probably was pretty amped up about it and took those extra calories to the gym. that extra energy and used it towards exercise yeah, on a subconscious basis. So I think that's where some of the disappearance happened. And then there is also a slight chance, hypothetically, that there was more excretion of energy through just the nitrogen excretory routes.
Mhm.
And then another potentially odd thing, and I wish they actually tested resting metabolic rate changes, but they didn't. But either way, I spoke with Joey Antonio at a conference, and he said that a lot of the subjects reported sleeping, sweating while sleeping. Like once they ramped up their protein intake, they experienced what you and I would call meat sweats.
Absolutely.
Right. When we go to like an all-you-can-eat Brazilian
A rhodesia. Yep.
situation, you just literally start sitting there sweating. And so there's energy expenditure involved with that. There is a thermic effect. So just kind of tying them all together, we have misreporting, displacement of calories, meat sweats, and also potentially increased excretory stuff. And then, non-exercise activity increase along with potential exercise activity increase. And what you have in those free living conditions is almost an auto-regulation of the disappearance of protein. And so that's what happens in free living conditions in resistance trained subjects. That was different from the metabolic ward conditions in untrained sedentary subjects of Bray and his colleagues.
Absolutely. Alan, thank you so much for covering that, because and the reason I want to be, I'm selfish with this question, because I've had so many clients that have come to me and they think they can eat unlimited amounts of protein and there is no essentially energetic cost because of these studies. And they say, well, we're only eating 3 grams per kilogram. Well, I explained to them, listen, over 1.6 to 2.2, we're really not getting any more increases in fat-free mass. During a dieting scenario, I do go off of what you guys recommended in your evidence-based recommendations and also the work that Eric Helms did for his master's thesis, I believe, which was between 2.3 to 3.1 grams per kilogram. But above that, if it's extra calories and we're in a surplus, let's allocate that more to carbs or more to fats and some energy substrates. But a lot of times, I'll have clients that they start gaining weight and I don't have them in a massive surplus. And it's like, oh, well, I bumped up my protein intake by 100 grams. First of all, when I look through their logs and stuff and I start really digging in deep, peeling back the layers of the onion, they're doing it through whole food sources, so chicken breasts, or they're doing it through steak or meats. And despite them being, low energy density items, they are coming with some added fats as well. And so that's increasing the total caloric burden of their diet. But also they have this mindset that it's free calories and it's not, you know what I mean? That they almost use it as their argument for an argument against the energy balance model, calories in, calories out. But really that's not, Jose Antonio will talk about the disappearance of these extra calories, but he's not saying that it disproves the law of thermodynamics. He's saying, listen, there are other mechanisms that it's influencing. And as we increase calories, you increase the energy inside, you increase the energy outside. That's the concept of energy flux, which I speak about quite frequently on the show. So we're increasing, we're putting more food into the system, more energy into the system, we're pulling more out. It's not like, hey, we're going to put in 400 to 800 more calories. You're going to sit there and do your regular activities and you're not going to gain any weight or any fat, because that would disprove energy balance.
Right. Yeah. And people also don't talk enough about misreporting due to shame avoidance in the research scenario. So that is something that I don't even think Joey puts in his publications as the possibility of, maybe he has, maybe he actually has, but yeah, misreporting is a thing. And with our, I say our population, folks who know their diets down to the gram, and they comply down to the gram. If you genuinely add, let's say, 50 to 100 grams of protein to your diet, and you keep everything the damn same, you could potentially duplicate a Bray and colleagues situation where you gain fat mass along with potentially some lean mass. However, in free living conditions where you just sort of let the increased protein in a way dictate what goes on behind the scenes, then it can potentially disappear. And it has over a series of like 4 or 5 studies now in athletic subjects. So I think that the protein overfeeding thing has its applications. I think you can strategically use it for folks who are psychologically fatigued from intake restriction. And if you're going to, in quotes, go off, then try it with protein. And I've done this with subjects with a protein hyperfeeding type of model, where it's done a couple of times a week, where they just go off on their favorite, animal.
And Alan, I want to share with you, I've utilized that tactic with myself and with clients after seeing you write about it and hearing you speak about it. And it is extremely effective. If we're going to overfeed on anything, my priority list is first, it's going to be protein. Second, it's going to be carbohydrates, because they're more energy. It's more energy costly to go through the process of de novo lipogenesis. And we see that in like the Horton studies from the 90s, where they upregulate, they kept feeding these guys bagels, and they had to increase just to make that 1,000-calorie surplus, because when they did it in comparison to fats are energetically extremely easy to get stored in adipose tissue. So it's 95% of the fats that you take in. I always tell clients, and I say this so they really get it across to them, the fat that you eat is the fat on your ass. You know what I mean? It's not your carbohydrates. It's not going through DNL. We know that even in overfeeding studies of both carbohydrates and fats, only 2% of the calories or of the fat grams that were added in overfeeding studies on females were from carbohydrates getting converted into triglycerides via de novo lipogenesis. But with protein, that's going to be my number one lever if someone's really suffering with satiety. But I wanted to get across to the audience, as well as to many of my clients who I'm going to send this to, that it's not free calories. We still have to consider it. Is it going to be the best thing if you're suffering satiety issues or appetite regulation issues? 100%. But let's not think we can just start adding steaks left and right and not get some weight gain, or then be frustrated as to why your fat loss is plateauing.
Yeah, it's definitely not free calories. If you were to employ the protein overfeeds or protein hyperfeeds, then if you wanted to nitpick at least making the theoretical model work, then you would do lean protein sources.
Yeah. What I found good success with was chicken, shrimp, egg whites, stuff like that. Very low fat, alternatives.
Yep. And it doesn't seem to make much of a dent in body fat when it's done in a controlled way and not in a frequent way through the week. I mean, but Antonio's research was eye-opening because of its consistency. But we do have to remember the population that it was used on, and we do have to remember maybe the tendencies behavior-wise of that population.
Yeah, they're already active populations. They're already going to be crushing themselves in the gym. And especially just even like the placebo effect of like, hey, I'm eating more protein. I'm trying to put this towards, accruing skeletal muscle tissue. Like, let me train even harder. Then their energy expenditure is going up. Let me be more active. I have more food and fuel in the system. Let me go for extra walks or whatever it may be. And those are things that in these studies, they're not reporting or they're not really analyzing. So it's really hard to take that and say, oh, it was just the protein. All they did was add protein in and nothing else within the energy balance equation. We have to look at thermic effective feeding. We have to look at non-exercise activity thermogenesis, exercise activity thermogenesis, the potential increase in RMR that we know comes just from eating more calories. Like we see that in research, I believe Harris et al., 2006, he saw even within the first week of overfeeding, before anyone had gained any weight, they already saw an increase in resting metabolic rate. So it's all these mechanisms, all these levers that are being pulled. It's not just, hey, we isolate one thing, we increase calories and it disappears. Because that, that would be great. I would love that. I'm a big proponent of protein, as I know you are yourself, but there's many things within the energy balance equation that we have to take into consideration.
For sure. It's a seesaw effect of the variables.
Absolutely. They're interdependent on one another. All right. So one last question for you, Alan. I wanted to see if you could go over, what does the research you've done indicate is the most optimal protein distribution per day for maximizing muscle gain? And the reason I ask this is because, there's this pendulum in nutrition, and it tends to swing back and forth between extremes, as I'm sure you can attest to. So we have some in the bodybuilding camp, that say that you have to eat, at least 16 times per day. You have to eat protein, consume protein at least 6 times per day to maximize muscle. And then we have those, especially like in the intermittent fasting crowd or the carnivore camps, that say that you can eat, protein 1 to 2 times per day and you won't see any decrement in muscle. So I would love for you to cover that. I know you've done a great paper with Brad Schoenfeld on this and really showed what you guys believe to be the most optimal amount or the area to shoot for that's kind of in the middle. It's moderate. So it's not sexy as many people. They either want 2 or 1 or 2, they want 6 or 8. You know what I mean? But you have great research, great evidence behind this, and I would love for you to share it with our audience.
Right. Yeah. This definitely doesn't have the axe effect, but so just, the question of protein distribution to maximize muscle gain. First, we have to remember we're talking about maximizing muscle gain. So the goal of retaining muscle under, let's say, hypocaloric or dieting conditions is kind of a different thing, right? So we have to delineate between those two goals: maximizing muscle gain, which would, with most populations, involve an overall hypercaloric condition, sustained caloric surplus to maximize growth. That would support, escalations in training volume, et cetera. Those are the conditions we're talking about with protein distribution. And I can also talk about the other side of the other goal, where we're talking about retaining muscle while dieting. So with regard to maximizing growth, what we want to do in the short term is maximize net muscle protein gains. So we want to maximize muscle protein synthesis. And if you think of muscle protein turnover as the cycle of the ongoing perpetual cycle of muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown, and you can even look at it at the whole body level, whole body protein synthesis, whole body protein breakdown, which is a whole other academic debate. What's more important, muscle protein turnover at the muscle level versus at the whole body level. So somebody like Stu Phillips would say protein turnover at the muscle level is most important. And somebody like Rob Wolf would say, well, we got to look at protein turnover at the whole body level, because the body can sequester protein from various compartments towards muscle when it needs to, right? So there's that whole rabbit hole, right? So I'm going to try not to complicate this. Let's look at muscle protein turnover. The goal would be to gain muscle protein in net amounts of muscle protein over time. The way we do that is by maximizing muscle protein synthesis through the course of the day. The way we do that is by maximizing muscle protein synthesis with every meal. So if we were to attempt to hit the ceiling of muscle protein synthesis per meal, apparently, and before I proceed with that, yes, minimizing muscle protein breakdown is part of what we want to do as well. But with feeding, the muscle protein synthesis side far outweighs by like 4 to 5-fold the muscle protein breakdown side. And plus, it's just logistically infeasible to measure both, to measure. I mean, it can be done, but it's just a logistical nightmare to do it. So we've settled on the idea, well, most of us anyway, that measuring muscle protein synthesis is good enough. Okay, so that's kind of like a little caveat there. So in order to maximize muscle protein synthesis, which would represent this short-term index of muscle growth, the dose for younger people appears to be a little bit lower than the dose for older people to max out MPS. So younger folks appear to max out MPS like 20 to 25 grams, and older folks tend to max it out between 40, let's say 35 and 45-ish grams. Okay.
Now, Alan, that's in the case of when we're not training, because there is study that's from Tipton's lab. RIP to him. But we also do have other studies that was done after, I believe it was a leg extension study of like 3 sets. So none of our bros out here are doing that. So let's also just because, we're going to have people out there saying 20, 25 grams. I eat more than that in a meal. Why am I doing that?
Oh, don't worry. I'll get there.
Hell yeah.
Don't worry. I'll get there.
He was building for a big climax, Brandon.
I'm sorry. I get too excited.
I need to warn people about this. The answer to this question is just so rambly and long, man. So this was in earlier research prior to, I know you know the name of it, Longland, I believe it was. No, yes, McNaughton and colleagues. All right.
I thought you were going to talk about the recomp study, because that's my favorite. 2.4 grams compared to 1.2.
The 2. Yeah, that was Longland. But McNaughton, what year was McNaughton?
That was
Is 20
2012.
2012. You
Yeah.
sure about that? McNaughton?
I'm almost sure. I mean, I could look it up.
Okay.
It could have been earlier. I could be wrong.
I'm thinking it was 2014, but you know, knowing you, you're probably right.
Regardless of the year, you can tell us the study
Look
and
at
how
us.
it was
Look at us
a full
go.
body training.
We're so OCD, it's insane. So, okay. So our prior knowledge to McNaughton and colleagues was that the post-exercise feeding maxed out MPS in young folks at about 20 to 25 grams. But what McNaughton did for this study finally was do a higher volume type of training bout that trained the full body. I believe that the sets were in the 20s, mid 20s total for the full body. And they found that that created a larger sink for effective protein feeding that would raise MPS. So 40 grams of protein stimulated MPS to a higher degree than 20 grams of protein did for the first time in young adults. And so we kind of went, oh goodness, here we are, like we were thinking that the max MPS ceiling was 20 to 25 grams. And here we have a set of researchers who actually put the subjects through more than just a few sets of leg extensions and leg presses, and measure the anabolic response to protein feeding. And the ceiling is much higher. And prior to that, we had already known that older subjects, when I say older, I mean subjects roughly in their 70s and beyond, they are a little bit slower to warm. So because of age-related anabolic resistance, then they require a higher protein dose per meal to stimulate the same level of muscle protein synthesis as younger subjects. So what all of this is leading to is the question of what amount of protein per meal maximizes muscle protein synthesis. Because what we're trying to do for muscle growth is maximize the level of muscle protein synthesis per day. So we got to find out what maximizes it per meal. And if we can figure that out, then we can figure out, well, how do we structure the meals so that we make each meal maximally anabolic? So that's one way that the question was approached. And the way that Brad and I looked at this question is we kind of started from the top and worked our way down. So there's a hierarchy of importance when it comes to protein feeding and muscle growth, or anything really, honestly, anything, even performance. Okay. So the hierarchy is this: the most important thing that matters is total amount of protein that you take in for the day. That's of number one importance. And everything else, seriously, it's not like this with carbohydrate, but it is like this with protein. So top tier of importance, total daily protein. Distant second tier would be the distribution or the number of meals and how they're structured dose-wise through the day for protein. And the third tier is the timing of that protein around the training bout. And so that's the hierarchy of importance for protein intake. So we took the top of the hierarchy and we determined that, all right, well, the bulk of the literature on non-dieting resistance trainees indicates that an appropriate range for maximizing muscle growth, as you know, this sort of golden range that we've burned into the literature by now, 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, or in imperial terms, 0.7 to 1.0 grams per kilogram of body weight, right? So with that first tier in place, pretty much, unmoving, then we got to figure out what is the maximum amount of protein per meal that would add up to 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, and how do we divvy that up realistically and look at the research and tie that in with what actually maximizes MPS per meal. And so we essentially looked at the high end of what maximizes MPS in young subjects and older subjects. And it's roughly, and we're looking at the high outlying ends. So it's roughly 0.4 to 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. When you're looking at protein feedings per meal, that would theoretically pull all the stops towards maxing out muscle protein synthesis. So seriously, all we needed to do was, okay, well, that's 0.4 to 0.6. How many meals at 0.4 to 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight would equal 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight by the end of the day. How many meals would that require? And the simple answer is 4 meals. And in our papers, we made sure to put at least 4 meals. The at least part is key. Only because observationally, in various athletes, especially physique athletes, 2.2 is kind of the low end of what they consume. The successful ones, a gram of protein per pound of body weight amongst the competitors is the low end of what they consume. And so with research, you have to factor in what, oh gosh, what's his name? Jim Rohn. The success leaves clues. So you always have to factor that in, because with research, the successful athletes are doing most of the things right in the trenches. And so if we're doing research and the stuff doesn't necessarily line up with what the people are doing in the trenches, we have to kind of still be open to the possibility that maybe there's some gray area here that we aren't covering. So when we issued our recommendations for the optimal distribution of protein-rich meals for the day to maximize muscle growth, we boil it down to at least 0.4 to 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight for each meal, at least 4 times a day. So that's kind of the practical. Now, here's the thing that we didn't put in the papers, and the thing that we both, or at least I think anyway, I don't know, honestly, I don't know whether if you did 3 meals a day, if you took that protein, that total daily protein, divided into 3 meals a day, instead of like 4 or more, we honestly don't know whether the 4 or more would tangibly and meaningfully perform better than something really kind of easy like 3 meals. But we don't know it. We don't want high level competitors to bank on it, you know.
Better safe than sorry.
Right. But if you are a recreational athlete, if you're a casual in quotes, and you don't have any serious competitive goals, and there's not a lot at stake, then truly you could probably maximally gain you could maximally fulfill your real world goals in 3 protein feedings a day, as long as you hit that total. Okay, so that is the goal of maximizing muscle gain. We'll set that aside for a second. So protein distribution for retaining muscle while dieting is, in a nutshell, it's whatever the hell you want to do. And we only know this because this has been much more exhaustively investigated than the goal of muscle growth. So in research and in public health, nobody gives a damn about muscle growth. But in public health, and therefore the research dollars will always go to dieting, seeing what happens with dieting. So we have a ton of research showing that meal frequency and even, you know, protein frequency included, really doesn't freaking matter whether you have 2 meals a day or 22 meals a day. You're going to similarly retain your muscle tissue. And so that can be individualized. There's a lot more room for negotiation as far as how low you want to go with meal frequency to retain muscle. You want to do the GOMAD thing. Wait, not GOMAD. I'm showing my age, not GOMAD. OMAD. OMAD. GOMAD is something very special.
Drink a gallon of milk a day.
Can you imagine doing that? Can you imagine your life for the time you do GOMAD? Woo! You would dominate any space you're in. You would just clear the place out. But yeah, so there is different theoretical needs for those different sides of the coin. So hopefully that wasn't too convoluted.
No, I think you wrapped that up perfectly, Alan. Listen, we are going to close out the podcast at this time. Alan, please let everyone know where they can find you, anything, your resources, your new book, Flexible Dieting, that I have right here. Thank you, which I'll be reading this week.
Oh, dope.
And all the other things that they could find you, your research review. Guys, Alan is a wealth of knowledge. As you could see, we just nerded out for close to an hour and a half, longest podcast we've ever had. And I'm sure you're going to get so much from this podcast, but also from all of the insight, the experience, and the evidence-based information that he puts out.
Dude, it's really awesome to hear somebody of your professional and career/academic stature say that. I know that you are on top of this stuff, and really the goal from the beginning was to create not necessarily followers, but to create leaders. And you, Brandon, are a prime example of that. And I really mean that. And so
Appreciate that, my friend.
It means an extra amount to hear those words from you, for sure. So to the listeners, thank you guys all so much for tuning in. I know that we get into the weeds here, and we're a little bit insane, but so thanks for hanging in there with us. And you can find me at alanaragon.com. I did just release a book called Flexible Dieting that's available everywhere. I mean, even it's even in Walmart and Target, for crying out loud. So yeah, you can just go to alanaragon.com, go to the books link and get the book. I have a research review that I've started, actually, the research review thing in the fitness space that I've been doing since 2008. And so the research review is just a way to stay on top of the current research for those of you in the nutrition and training obsession space. But yeah, you can find me. I don't even know if I want to admit this. I've been on Instagram for a while. I've been on Facebook and Twitter, but I caved in and opened up a TikTok.
Wow. I wasn't expecting that move, my man. But hey, that's one. You're going to be one great resource on TikTok.
I don't even know if I'm going to, I mean, I've done one post and I just, I'm so embarrassed for doing it. No, I didn't dance around, but a bunch of my friends were like telling me I'm an idiot for not opening up a free avenue to broaden my audience reach. So I'm like, dude, I want to be smart too. So I did it. So I'm on freaking TikTok now. So there you go.
Guys, you heard it here first. Alan is now on TikTok. For any of our listeners that are big TikTok fans, go get some evidence-based information. Don't just watch your favorite influencer point at different nonsense. Listen to Alan and the information that he's going to dispel. But guys, thank you as always. Jeff, close us out, man.
I actually want to ask him a question. So Alan, you and I never chatted or met up until today, but I wanted to thank you for that, because I think you broke down topics that a lot of people ask us questions on in a scientific but average Joe Jan way of saying it, that a lot of people can pull that apart and be able to tease it apart and actually walk away with applicable things to enhance their knowledge and the way they go about stuff. So thank you for that. But I am actually in the process of writing a book, and mine's about my life. It's different. But what advice do you have as someone who has written a book to a fellow author like myself? Because it has been, I'm over 40,000 words now. And I go to Austin to write with Scribe in August for their writer workshop. So yeah, I'm curious to see how it was for you, because I mean, to get 500 good words, as my good friend Stephen Pressfield says, it's hard to get 500 good words. So I was just curious what you thought, if you had any tips for me real quick, and even for our audience who write long content like Brandon.
Sure, man. So you're 40,000 words in. Can I ask what percentage of being done would that represent for your project?
I'm suspecting I'll finish at 60 to 70. I'm hoping I'm clipping about, I took off Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 4th of July weekend, knowing I'd be dead at my gym and with online client stuff. So I'm going to try to chuck out a couple thousand words every day and get really ahead of it, because we actually have time with an editor in Austin. We have like private editors we get to spend time with. Like Tucker Max is leading it. He wrote I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell. So it'll be a good time. I think like Ryan Holiday is coming through. So it's really interesting to get to meet these people and hear them. But I'm probably 65% done, maybe 70 at this point.
Okay. Like with my book project, I think it was close to 100,000 words, very close. Certainly with the references. Yeah. My main issue was not making numerical errors. Like in chapter 6 in the first round of prints, I messed up like kilograms and pounds on in the summary.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, geez. There's like, I don't know how many books out there right now with that error in there, that numerical error. So I literally made an error page for the flexible dieting book. And there's 4 errors in the first round of prints. So it's alanaragon.com/FD error log. All right. Flexible dieting error log, FD error log. And there's 4 errors that, because I'm all about transparency. If I effed up, I want you to know exactly where it is, because that's just, I operate best being transparent. So if you have any numerical content, please go over it. Even if you think it's just easy and you did it right, just go over it and re-go over it. The non-numerical content, just be you and speak from the heart. And that's what people have told me about my book, is that it doesn't read like a textbook, even though it covers the content of a nutrition textbook. If I want to insert an opinion in there, if I want to speak a certain colloquial way, then I do that. And it's odd, like what is going to be appropriate for the nutrition and fitness space is going to be different for like the other spaces. Like,
true.
I'm kind of glad I didn't go off on F bombs and S bombs and A bombs and stuff like that in my book, because when I read the reviews of the books of my competitors, if there is a freaking swear word in there, it's going to throw a bunch of people into a tailspin. You know, they kind of want to be able to give those books as a gift to their grandmother and whatnot. And so like with that kind of language, it depends on what the niche is, but I kind of had to consciously not cuss through the course of 300 pages, which is really tough for me, because I naturally just blam. Like I consciously tried not to drop the 4-letter words during a podcast. So for you, I would honestly say, man, the closer you can sound to your authentic and actual and real self, that's what's going to bring out your best writing. So just literally just be yourself as much as you can, and don't worry about trying to write a certain way, with the exception of if you've got like my audience who might throw a bit of a fit if I drop an F-bomb in the book. You know, you know your audience better than I do, but just really, man, just try to be yourself. And the conditions, the working conditions under how you're writing a book will affect your writing.
100%. Yeah.
If you're super time crunched, if you've got this insane do you have like a hard deadline for your book?
Oh no. Once I go down there in August, I have a year start date. Like I'm way ahead. I'm hoping to arrive down there with my shit done, so that way I can go ahead and get torn apart and get busy and get to work. I'm an executor when it comes to something I want to finish. And this is like the biggest project I've ever taken on for myself.
This guy's been churning and burning through it.
I mean, like I've been churning out 2,500 words a week. I have it blocked out 3 times a week in my calendar that I will do no matter what, and just sit down and get some coffee and put some good metal on. And before I know it, I'm in flow, and away my little fingers take me.
Well, seriously, like our 2 minutes of conversation right here, you will do awesome if you just be yourself through your book. Don't let your editors kind of erase your voice. I know 100%. It's not their job to, erase your voice. It's their job to preserve it and all that. But just keep your voice, man, and just literally be yourself, and just flow, and don't worry about too much how you should be writing. Honestly, you're how old? Well, I don't know. You're in middle age. We already
41, baby.
What'd you say?
41.
41. Love it. Love it.
Yep.
Awesome. So you have some life experience under your belt. Yeah. So nobody can really tell you what the hell to put to the page. Just literally put yourself on the page, and don't hold back,
Badass, man. Dude, that is awesome advice. like to anyone who's listening, coach or not, like that's great advice to be yourself and you write your content from your heart. So that's good stuff, man. I appreciate
Life
you
is your canvas.
sharing that with me. But guys, thank you for Alan for joining us. B, man, I know me and you will be texting. Alan, I hope you'll come and join us again. And next time I'll have a slew of questions to pepper you with that will.
We didn't even cover fasting.
I know. I love fasting. That's a conversation that we could have.
We're gonna do a full series on fasting. So we'd love to have you on.
Yeah, absolutely. But
I would love to be back.
Brandon was like, Jeff, you don't even understand how much of a crush I have on Alan. Like it was very disgusting in the back channel. I was like,
this is 15 years. This is 15 years of questions in the making, my guy.
So I was like, all right, man, I'll let you have today. And it was great to see him smile and you guys do that. It was an awesome episode. Thank you for
I loved it, man. It was a privilege. Thank you guys so much. I could go on for another hour, but I don't know if the listeners could stand it. So
no, we'll split up and hit with another one. But you all have yourself a good day, guys.